Hello YouTube, I'm Toby. Today we're taking a look at the MSI GTX560. Now I actually just got this card today and I couldn't wait to test it out. And as you can see, it's got two DVI ports, one mini HDMI, it's also got two 6-pin PCIe power connectors, and it's got 1 whole gigabyte of GDDR5 VRAM. Now the system will be installing this in as my test bench, and it consists of a quad-core Athlon X4 845 processor clocked at 3.5 GHz. Furthermore, we've got 8 GB of DDR3 RAM clocked at 1333 MHz. The benchmarks will be running on the Resident Evil 6 benchmarking tool. We'll be running a Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Subnautica, PUBG, and FORTNITE. Starting out with Resident Evil 6 benchmarking tool, I set the settings to medium. And well, this card performed very well. We ended up with a score of 5,990, which is it's pretty good actually. Next up, I fired up Counter-Strike Global Offensive at medium settings. The first map we ran was Nuke, and we got a frame rate somewhere between 50 and 100 frames per second, depending on what's going on in the map. Now there was a little bit of stutter in Nuke, and I've recently learned that can be quite a difference between the Counter-Strike Global Offensive maps. So just to be sure, I fired up DDoS 2. The frame rate seemed to be pretty much the same, hovering somewhere between 50 and 100 frames per second. However, DDoS 2 felt a lot smoother than Nuke did. I have to admit, I'm not that much into what maps are better than others regarding frame rate and all, but I was honestly quite surprised to feel this difference between these two maps. Next up, I fired up Subnautica, set the settings to medium, and we seem to have a pretty good frame rate somewhere between 40 and 70, again depending on what's going on in the frame. We did have a little bit of a stutter and some frame drops, and sometimes the frame rate went down around 30 but quickly jumped back up to somewhere between 40 and 70. PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds is probably the one I'm most excited for. I set these settings to low and pretty much just went in the game. The frame rate that we saw was somewhere between 20 and 35 frames per second, again depending on what's going on in the map. It did feel a little stuttery at times, and I honestly have to say that this, although somewhat playable, was not an entirely enjoyable experience to say the least. FORTNITE seems to be a popular title nowadays, so of course I'm going to give that a go. Set the settings to low, and well, to be honest, this actually ran FORTNITE very well. We seem to be somewhere between 60 and 80 frames per second, again depending on what's going on in the map, but overall it seemed like a very smooth experience, and I could definitely see this card being used for something like this. We're not entirely done yet. I wanted to overclock this card just to see just what I could do with it. I'll put up the schematic for the overclock. I did run into some stability issues. I had to fine-tune the final overclock, but eventually I actually managed to get it working. So I fired up PUBG once again, set the settings to low again. Really, honestly, I didn't really feel much of a difference. In the lobby, you know, the before game player lobby, it really seemed to run fine. But once we got into the actual game, it was pretty much the same as before, running somewhere between 20 and 35 frames per second with a little bit of stuttering. So, who is this card for? Well, people who want to play older games, or Global Offensive, or FORTNITE, and maybe even Subnautica. Sure, they can use this card, but if you want to play anything more intensive like PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, I'm not sure this is the card for you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching.